Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Nature Channel. Did you know that right now, beneath the surface of the ocean, rivers are flowing? Real rivers, with banks, with currents, with their own quiet directions, moving silently through the deep blue, far below the waves you can see. Some of them are wider than the Amazon. Some of them carry water so different from the sea around them that fish living nearby can actually feel the invisible boundary, like standing at the edge of a gentle breeze. These underwater rivers have their own seasons, their own rhythms, their own ancient patience. And tonight, we are going to drift down into that soft, dark, still world together, slowly, without hurry, and let the quiet of the deep water carry you into rest. Take a slow breath in and let it go. The water is waiting. Let's go down. Close your eyes for just a moment and picture the ocean, not the wild crashing surface. No, not that part. Imagine going deeper. The light fades slowly, like a lamp being turned down by gentle hands. The blue gets darker, the sounds of the world above, the gulls, the wind, the distant rumble of ships, all of it softens and then disappears. And here, in this deep and quiet place, something remarkable is happening. The water is moving, not randomly, not swirling, but flowing, purposefully, steadily, like a river. The idea might seem impossible at first, that a river could exist inside an ocean. But the ocean is not one thing. It is many things layered on top of each other. Warm water and cold water, salty water and less salty water, light water and heavy water. And when these different kinds of water meet, they do not always mix. Sometimes one slides beneath the other, and in that sliding, a current is born. A current so focused, so directed, so river-like, that scientists have had to borrow the very word. Underwater river, submarine river, a river within the sea. These currents move along the ocean floor the way a river moves along a valley. They follow the shape of the land beneath them. And yes, there is land beneath them. The ocean floor is not flat. It is ancient and complex, and full of mountains and valleys and plains and canyons so deep that Mount Everest could stand inside them and still not reach the surface. And through these valleys, the rivers of the deep flow silently onward. One of the most well-known of these hidden rivers exists in the Black Sea. If you were to dive very deep near the sea floor there, you would find a current of much saltier, much heavier water flowing along the bottom, carving a channel into the sediment. This channel has banks. It has a floodplain. It even has waterfalls, places where the heavy water tumbles down a slope in slow, graceful cascades, like something from a dream of water. Scientists who first discovered it described a feeling of unreality, of standing at the edge of something that should not exist, and yet was undeniably, softly, perfectly real. The Black Sea River, if you could follow it from its source to where it empties into the deeper basin below, stretches for about 60 miles. That is not a tiny trickle. That is a real, full, slow-moving river. It is just that it happens to be underwater. It happens to be invisible from above. It happens to have been flowing quietly, without anyone knowing, for thousands and thousands of years. There is something deeply peaceful about that. Something that reminds you that the world is full of quiet things doing their quiet work, unobserved and unhurried and perfectly content. Take another slow breath. Let your shoulders soften. You don't have to go anywhere. The river will come to you. These deep rivers form because of something called density. Dense water sinks. Water becomes dense when it is cold, or when it is very salty, or both. In some parts of the world, evaporation pulls so much water from the surface of the sea that the salt left behind makes the remaining water grow heavier and heavier, until finally it can no longer stay near the surface. It sinks. And as it sinks, it begins to flow because the shape of the ocean floor gives it direction, the way a tilted floor gives a rolling marble direction, down into the valleys, along the contours, quietly away. Imagine a glass of water where someone has carefully poured in a spoonful of very cold, very salty water along the edge. If you watched it slowly, you would see that cold, salty water sink to the bottom of the glass and spread out along the floor of the glass in a thin layer, while the warmer, lighter water above remains undisturbed. The ocean does this on a scale too vast to fully picture, but the principle is the same. Simple, gentle, gravity doing its patient work. The water that flows in these deep rivers can be extraordinarily old. Some of the deep water moving along the ocean floor today has not seen sunlight in hundreds of years. It sank at the surface perhaps 600 years ago, carrying with it the dissolved breath of the medieval sky, and since then it has been traveling slowly, patiently, steadily, through the dark and the cold, on its way to somewhere else. Every molecule of that water was once rain, was once a wave, was once a cloud drifting over some long-forgotten field. Now, it is a river in the deep. If you are enjoying this journey, feel free to leave a comment below. It means so much to know you are here, resting along with us. And if this kind of gentle story is what you need at the end of your day, there is a full playlist waiting for you, with many more quiet places to drift through. In the Mediterranean Sea, there is another such river. The Mediterranean is surrounded by land on nearly all sides, which means it loses a great deal of water to evaporation. The sun is bright there and warm, and it pulls moisture from the surface constantly. This makes the remaining water saltier and heavier than the water in the Atlantic Ocean just outside. So, when the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic through the narrow Strait of Gibraltar, something beautiful happens. The heavier Mediterranean water sinks and flows out along the bottom into the Atlantic, like a river flowing into a wider river. And on the surface, Atlantic water flows inward to replace it. Two rivers, two directions, one narrow channel, all happening at once, invisibly, gracefully, without interruption. The Mediterranean outflow, as this deep river is called, travels far into the Atlantic after it slips through the Strait of Gibraltar. It sinks to a depth of about 1,000 meters, roughly half a mile down, and there it settles, because at that depth the water density matches its own. It is like finding the exact right shelf to rest on, and from that shelf it spreads outward slowly, like ink dropped into still water in slow motion. Scientists can trace its journey by its saltiness, the way you might follow a particular scent through a room. The Mediterranean water is salty enough that even after traveling hundreds of miles into the Atlantic, it still carries a measurable trace of where it came from. This tracing is one of the quieter miracles of ocean science. You can take a sample of water from the middle of the Atlantic, far from any coastline, And by measuring its salt content and temperature, you can say with confidence, some of this water once lay beneath the Mediterranean sun. Some of this water once reflected the cliffs of Gibraltar. Some of this water once touched the same shores that ancient ships sailed across. The ocean keeps these records faithfully, the way a forest keeps the record of every rainfall in the growth rings of its oldest trees. Let your breathing slow just a little more. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding you. The deep water is that heavy too, pressing gently against everything it touches, not with force, but with presence. In the cold waters near Antarctica, something similar but even grander takes place. The water there is not just saltier, it is also nearly as cold as water can get without becoming ice. And cold water is very, very dense. This Antarctic bottom water, as it is called, sinks so deeply and so completely that it flows along the very floor of the world's oceans. It is arguably the deepest river on Earth. It travels northward from Antarctica, spreading under the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, creeping slowly beneath everything, like the quietest breath of the planet itself. It takes centuries for this water to complete its journey. Centuries of patient, purposeful, completely unhurried movement through the dark. There are places in the ocean called cold seeps, where water very slowly percolates up through the sediment of the ocean floor. This water is sometimes rich in minerals or chemicals, and around these seeps, remarkable little communities of creatures have gathered. Tube worms, clams with unusual colors, small crabs feeling their way through the dark. These creatures have never seen sunlight. They may live their entire lives within a few meters of where they were born, surrounded by the same gentle, slow water, the same soft darkness, the same quiet chemistry. And yet, they thrive. They are perfectly suited to their world. There is something very restful about creatures who do not need to go anywhere, who have found exactly the place they belong and simply stayed. The deep sea floor around these rivers and currents is often covered in a fine, soft sediment. Marine snow, scientists call it, not because it is cold, but because it falls like snow. Tiny particles of organic matter, the remains of plankton and other small creatures from the surface far above, drift slowly downward through the water column over days and weeks, finally settling on the ocean floor in a thin, soft layer. This marine snow is one of the most peaceful images in all of nature. An endless, slow, soft snowfall in the dark, in the deep, all the time. Without noise, without storm, just a steady, gentle, downward drifting of the world's most patient snowflakes. Let's go a little deeper now, not in any frightening way, just a little further into the quiet. Imagine the temperature dropping very gently. Imagine the light from above becoming just a faint, pale suggestion, and then nothing at all. And in that nothing, the river is still flowing. You can feel it if you stay very still. A slow, cool movement of water along the floor, purposeful and calm. Beneath the Congo River in Africa, something extraordinary happens. The Congo is one of the world's mightiest rivers, and when it meets the Atlantic Ocean, it does not simply spread out and disappear into the sea the way many rivers do. Instead, the Congo's waters are so powerful and carry so much sediment that they plunge downward, extending out along the ocean floor through a massive underwater canyon, one of the longest submarine canyons in the world. The river essentially continues beneath the ocean, as though it refuses to stop being a river just because the sea is in its way. The underwater extension of the Congo stretches for hundreds of kilometers, and at its deepest, it plunges to over 3 miles below the surface. 3 miles, and still the water flows. This canyon is a world unto itself. Its walls are lined with sediments deposited over millions of years, layer upon layer, like the pages of a very slow book. Fish and other creatures move through its currents. The walls create shelter, the flow creates oxygen. Life, as it always seems to do, has found a way to settle into even this unlikely, deep, river-like groove in the ocean floor and make it home. The Amazon River, when it meets the Atlantic on the coast of Brazil, also sends its waters far out to sea. The Amazon carries so much fresh water, it is responsible for about 20% of all fresh water entering the world's oceans, that its influence can be detected hundreds of miles offshore. The ocean surface near the Amazon's mouth is actually less salty than the open sea. Satellite images can detect the color difference between the brown, sediment-rich river water and the blue of the Atlantic around it. From space, it looks like a pale stain spreading gently across the ocean, a reminder that even when a river seems to end, its water simply becomes part of something larger, something that flows on in new forms and new directions. If you have been with us before, you already know how good it feels to just let these images drift through your mind like leaves on slow water. And if this is your first time, welcome. You might enjoy browsing our playlist. There are many quiet journeys there waiting for a sleepy evening just like this one. The water cycle, the endless movement of water from sea to cloud, to rain, to river, and back to sea, is perhaps the most fundamental river of all. Every drop of water that falls as rain has been part of the ocean. Every river that flows to the sea is returning water that was borrowed for a while, held in cloud and ice and soil and living things, and is now making its way home. The underground rivers beneath the ocean are part of this cycle too. When deep water eventually rises back toward the surface, a process called upwelling, it brings with it nutrients from the deep, which feed the plankton, which feed the small fish, which feed the larger creatures, all the way up through the web of ocean life. The deep river feeds the world above it, quietly, without announcement, dependably. Somewhere in the North Atlantic, right now, as you're resting here, cold, dense water is sinking. It sinks at a particular place, in a part of the ocean near Greenland and Iceland, where the water has given its last warmth to the atmosphere and become heavy enough to descend. This sinking is the beginning of what oceanographers call the global ocean conveyor belt, a system of connected currents that circles the entire world over the course of roughly 1,000 years. The deep river that begins in the North Atlantic eventually makes its way to the Indian Ocean, to the Pacific, to the Southern Ocean, and back again. One continuous, connected, endlessly patient loop of moving water. You are lying still, and somewhere beneath several miles of ocean, water that has been traveling for centuries is completing one small part of that loop. 1,000 years ago, a medieval farmer in Iceland breathed out, and some molecules of that breath were carried by wind and rain into the sea, and they sank, and they have been traveling ever since. Tonight, they might be somewhere beneath the Pacific. In another few hundred years, they will rise again to the surface somewhere and rejoin the air. The ocean is patient in ways that are very difficult to fully grasp, and yet very easy to feel. If you let yourself simply rest and breathe and trust that things are moving as they should, your breath is part of this too. The carbon dioxide you breathe out dissolves into raindrops, and those raindrops fall into rivers, and those rivers carry it to the sea, where it becomes part of the chemistry of the ocean, influencing where deep waters form and how they move. You are connected to these rivers in the deep. You have always been connected. You breathe, and the ocean listens. The ocean moves, and eventually the air you breathe carries something of its ancient journeys back to you. Let your eyes feel heavier. There is no hurry. The river knows where it is going. You do not have to think about where you are going just now. In the deep water off the Bahamas, there is a feature known as a blue hole, a submarine cave, roughly circular, where the water is astonishingly still and astonishingly clear. These blue holes form in limestone, which dissolves slowly in slightly acidic water over thousands of years, leaving behind caverns and tunnels and chambers. The water inside moves very little. It stratifies into layers, fresh water near the surface, where rain has percolated down, and salt water below, brought in by the sea. The boundary between these layers is called a halocline, and it is one of the most eerily beautiful things in the ocean. When light enters a blue hole and strikes a halocline, it shimmers and ripples like the surface of a lake seen from beneath, a still, shimming, invisible line between two kinds of water, two rivers that never quite mix, sharing the same quiet dark. Divers who have explored blue holes describe the sensation as profoundly peaceful. The stillness inside is almost complete. Sound disappears. Time seems to slow. The formations on the walls, ancient stalactites that formed when the caves were dry land during ice ages long past, hang like chandeliers in the silence, their tips sometimes encrusted with crystals that catch a diver's light and return it in small, soft sparks. Some of these stalactites are over 15,000 years old. They formed when the last great ice age locked so much of the world's water in glaciers that the sea level was far lower, and what are now underwater caves were dry. Then the ice melted over thousands of slow years, and the sea crept back in, and the caves filled with water, and the stalactites were preserved exactly as they were, suspended now in stillness beneath the sea. There is something very comforting about the way the ocean preserves things. It is not careless. It holds what it is given. The stalactites are still there. The sediment layers are still there, faithful records of seasons and storms and years beyond counting. The deep rivers are still flowing the paths they have always followed. The ocean is, among all other things, a keeper of memory, a keeper of quiet. In some parts of the ocean, the rivers of the deep are marked by what are called temperature inversions, places where, instead of getting colder as you go deeper, the water gets briefly warmer before cooling again. This can happen near volcanic features on the ocean floor, where heat from the earth itself rises up through the rock and warms the water just above it. There are places on the ocean floor that are warm, that glow very faintly with the inner heat of the planet. Sitting above these warm patches are communities of creatures that depend on that warmth, that have organized their entire lives around a slow warmth rising from the rock below them, the way a cat finds a sunny patch of floor and arranges itself perfectly within it. Take a slow breath in through your nose. Let it out slowly through your mouth. Imagine the warmth of those deep sea vents far below, a warmth that has been rising from the interior of the earth for millions of years, gentle and constant, warming a small patch of dark water and the creatures who have gathered there to receive it. In the Pacific Ocean, near the boundary between the warm surface waters and the cooler depths, there is a permanent layer called the thermocline. This is a kind of invisible floor within the ocean. Above it, water that has been stirred by wind and warmed by sun. Below it, the deep cold dark. The thermocline is not a sharp line. It is a gradual transition, a slow and gentle cooling as you descend. But it is consistent enough to act as a barrier, keeping the surface world and the deep world partially separate. The deep rivers below the thermocline move in a world that the sunshine above rarely touches directly. They are governed by different forces: pressure, density, the distant pull of the moon, and the slow tilt of the earth. Their rhythms are longer and slower than anything we can easily perceive, but they are real, they are flowing, they are continuous. If this kind of quiet story helps you sleep and unwind, we would love it if you liked the video. It really helps other sleepy souls find their way here. And if you have a topic you would like to dream about next time, leave it in the comments. We read everyone. Deep below the Indian Ocean, there is a river of cold water that originates near Antarctica and flows northward along the ocean floor. It is remarkably consistent. Oceanographers who have measured it over decades find that it flows in roughly the same direction at roughly the same depth, year after year. It is one of the most stable features of the ocean. While hurricanes form and fade, while the surface shimmers through 1,000 seasons, while ships sail overhead from port to port, this river continues its patient northward journey about 3 miles below the waves, carrying its cargo of cold, dense, oxygen-rich water toward the equator. This oxygen is important. The deep ocean floor would be a very different and much less hospitable place without the oxygen delivered by these deep currents. Without that steady supply brought by rivers that have traveled from the polar regions, many of the creatures living on the deep sea floor could not survive. The rivers feed the bottom of the ocean the way a spring feeds a meadow, invisibly, gently, from below. There are creatures in the deepest parts of the ocean that have never experienced a current fast enough to move them. They live in a stillness so complete that a single passing current, carrying a whiff of something new, is an event. A sea cucumber, moving so slowly across the sediment that its passage barely disturbs the marine snow above it. A sea lily, a creature that looks like a flower, but is actually an animal related to starfish, standing with its feathery arms spread wide to catch whatever tiny food particles drift past on the water. These creatures do not chase. They do not hurry. They wait with a patience that makes even the rivers of the deep seem impatient by comparison. The sea lily has been on this earth for nearly 500 million years. It survived the great extinction events. It survived the ice ages. It was here before the dinosaurs. It was here before the forests. It will likely be here long after we are gone. It stands in the deep water on its little stalk, spreading its arms in the gentle current, and it asks nothing of the world except that the water keep flowing. The water has always kept flowing. The water will always keep flowing. Let yourself feel that trust. Let it spread through you slowly, the way the Mediterranean water spreads through the Atlantic, gently, without hurry, finding its own level, settling exactly where it belongs. In the far north, near the Arctic Ocean, sea ice forms on the surface of the water in winter. As the water freezes, the salt is largely expelled. Ice is mostly fresh, and as it forms, the salt concentrates in the water just below the forming ice, making that water saltier and therefore heavier. This heavy, cold, salty water sinks, and as it sinks, it joins the family of deep currents, adding its cold weight to the rivers that flow along the bottom of the world. This process has been happening every winter for millions of years. Every winter, the Arctic breathes out a current. Every winter, a new river begins. The relationship between sea ice and deep currents is one of the most elegant feedback systems in nature. The cold makes the ice. The ice makes the salty water. The salty water sinks. The sinking water pulls warmer surface water from the south. The warmer water moderates the cold. And so on and so on, a slow circular conversation between the atmosphere and the ocean, between warmth and cold, between salt and fresh, between depth and surface. You breathe in, you breathe out. The rhythm is simple and complete. It has always been simple. The ocean knows this rhythm too. There are undersea mountains called seamounts scattered across the ocean floor, many of them the peaks of ancient volcanoes that never quite reached the surface. Where the deep rivers flow past these seamounts, the water is forced upward, over and around the obstacle, and this upwelling brings cold, nutrient-rich water toward the surface. Around seamounts, life concentrates. Corals grow on their slopes. Schools of fish gather to feed on the nutrients churned up by the upwelling current. The seamount becomes a garden watered by the deep river that passes it. A place of abundance created by the movement of ancient, invisible water. Some seamounts are completely unknown, except to the creatures living on them and the scientists who have mapped them. There are estimated to be around 30,000 seamounts in the world's oceans, and only a small fraction have been explored in detail. The ocean is still, in many ways, a wilderness, a quiet, deep, largely unseen wilderness full of rivers and gardens and ancient stone and creatures moving through the dark in patterns that predate human memory. We are so glad you are here with us tonight, resting and drifting. If you have a moment, you might want to check out our playlist for other nights just like this one. There are stories about forests and rain and ancient stones and the quiet world of birds at dusk. All of them are here, waiting whenever you need them. The temperature of the deep ocean is remarkably stable. While the surface can shift dramatically with the seasons, cold in winter, warm in summer, the deep water, far below the thermocline, barely changes at all from year to year. It hovers near freezing in most places, with a consistency that the surface world can only dream of. The deep rivers flow through a world of almost perfect constancy, always dark, always cold, always quiet, always moving. There is a kind of comfort in constancy. You do not have to adapt moment to moment to something that does not change. The creatures of the deep have settled into their constancy the way you are settling now into the warmth and stillness of wherever you are resting. They have found their place in a world that does not shift beneath them. And in that settledness, in that long and patient equilibrium, there is a profound and wordless peace. The pressure in the deep ocean is immense by human standards. At the deepest trenches, it is more than 1,000 times the pressure at sea level. And yet, the creatures there experience this as simply normal. They have no sense that the pressure is extraordinary. They have evolved within it, with it, as part of it. Their bodies are shaped to live exactly there, in exactly that weight of water. The deep rivers flow through a world of great pressure and great darkness, and the lives lived within that world are not diminished by either. They are simply differently shaped, differently arranged, perfectly suited. A small fish called the snailfish lives in the Mariana Trench, the deepest place in the ocean, nearly 7 miles below the surface. It is a pale, translucent creature, somewhat tadpole-shaped, and it moves through the dark with a kind of unhurried ease that suggests it has never felt anything but at home. It feeds, it drifts, it is alive, completely alive, in a place that seems to have no room for aliveness. The snailfish has never seen sunlight. It has never felt wind. It has never known the surface. And yet, it is content. It is exactly where it belongs. You too are exactly where you belong tonight, resting, still, letting the quiet of the deep water come to you. In the Atlantic Ocean, there is a phenomenon called Mediterranean outflow water, and researchers have been following its journey for decades. They release instruments, small, drifting devices that sink to the appropriate depth, and then float along with the current, recording temperature and salinity and position, transmitting their data to satellites overhead. These instruments have traced the outflow water hundreds of miles into the Atlantic, painting a slow picture of a river that is invisible to the eye, but completely real to the instruments that measure it. Watching the tracks of these drifters on a map, you can almost see the river, not with your eyes, but with your imagination, which is sometimes the better organ for perceiving beautiful things. Other deep currents have been mapped in similar ways. Off the coast of Antarctica, research ships have lowered instruments into the cold water and watched as the readings changed with depth. Warmer, then colder, then warmer again in strange inversions, each layer its own world, each with its own density and chemistry and direction of travel. The ocean reveals itself slowly, layer by layer, like the pages of a book written in a language you're just beginning to learn. And each page is quieter than the last. Each layer is stiller than the one above it. Down here, at the very bottom, there is something very close to absolute stillness. The marine snow continues to fall, slowly, endlessly, soft particles of the world's former life drifting down through the dark water, through the currents and the countercurrents and the layers of different densities, until finally they rest on the ocean floor and become part of the sediment, part of the record, part of the memory of the sea. In some parts of the ocean floor, the sediment is so fine and so deep that it preserves a record of the past several million years of ocean history, the chemistry of the water, the presence or absence of certain tiny creatures, the fluctuations of the climate. Researchers drill into this sediment and extract cores, long cylinders of compressed history, and read them the way you might read tree rings, each thin layer a year or a decade or a century of quiet accumulation. They find the fingerprints of ice ages and warm periods. They find evidence of ancient deep currents, layers of sediment deposited by rivers that flowed along this very floor long before any human walked the earth. The deep rivers are old. They have always been here. They will be here long after all of us. There is a particular quality of silence that exists in the deep ocean. Not the silence of absence. There is actually quite a bit of sound in the deep sea. The clicks and groans of whales, the snapping of shrimp, the distant rumble of undersea earthquakes. But there is a quality of isolation, of remove, that creates something silence-like. Down there, the sounds of the human world are filtered away, one by one, until what remains is only the ocean's own sounds, which are unhurried and strange, and in their strangeness, very calming. Whales are among the most eloquent speakers of the deep. Blue whales, the largest animals on Earth, produce low, rumbling songs that can travel thousands of miles through the ocean. They use the deep sound channel, a layer of the ocean at a particular depth where sound travels most efficiently, bouncing between the seafloor and the surface in a way that allows it to propagate almost indefinitely. A blue whale singing in the Pacific can potentially be heard by another blue whale in the Atlantic. Their voices travel through the same water as the deep rivers, carried along the same ancient pathways, speaking to each other across impossible distances through the dark. The song of a blue whale, when recorded and played back at a higher speed, has a quality of melancholy and grandeur that is hard to describe. It moves through you. It settles somewhere behind the sternum. It reminds you of things you did not know you had forgotten. There is a depth in that sound, quite literally a depth, a fathomlessness, that corresponds to something deep in the listening creature too. We have always been moved by depth, by darkness, by distance, by the sound of things too large to fully see. Let your breathing find its own gentle depth now, not forced, not measured, just natural, just yours. Like a current that has found its level and flows easily without effort, simply because that is what water does. If tonight's story has been a comfort to you, we would love to know. A comment or a like means so much and helps this quiet channel reach more people who need a soft place to land at the end of their day. Thank you for being here with us. Beneath the Red Sea, which is surrounded by hot desert on both sides, the water is extremely salty. The evaporation rate in this part of the world is very high, and there are very few rivers feeding fresh water into the sea. So, the Red Sea is a kind of factory of dense, salty water, and like the Mediterranean, when the Red Sea connects to the Indian Ocean through the Gulf of Aden, this heavy water sinks and flows out along the bottom, creating another of the world's deep submarine rivers. This one carries the warmth of the Red Sea into the Indian Ocean, a ghostly thermal signature detectable hundreds of miles from its source. Scientists following this outflow have found that it influences the biology of the surrounding ocean in subtle ways. The slightly warmer, saltier water creates conditions that certain plankton prefer, and where the plankton gather, the fish follow, and where the fish follow, the larger hunters follow, all because of an invisible river of warm salt water flowing quietly along the ocean floor. Everything in the ocean is connected. Every current is connected to every other current. The deep rivers are tributaries of each other, feeding into each other, circling the world in one vast, complex, ancient system that has been operating since long before there were eyes to observe it. You are part of a connected world too, connected to the air, connected to the water in your body, most of which has been rain, has been river, has been ocean many times before, connected to everything that breathes and everything that flows. Let that connection feel like an embrace right now, not tight. Just present, like the pressure of deep water, something you can lean into, something that is always there, something that holds you without effort. There are places in the ocean where two currents, flowing in opposite directions, create a kind of gyrating circular motion at their boundary. These gyres, there are 5 large permanent ones in the world's oceans, are enormous, slow, circular rivers, each one taking years to complete a single rotation. The North Pacific Gyre, the South Pacific Gyre, the North Atlantic Gyre, the South Atlantic Gyre, the Indian Ocean Gyre. 5 great circles of water turning slowly in the dark and in the light, like the hands of a clock too large to see all at once. At the center of each gyre, the water is surprisingly calm. The circular current keeps the center still, like the eye of a very slow hurricane. These centers are among the quietest, most undisturbed places in the surface ocean, places where the water barely moves, where things float and are gently held. In the center of the North Atlantic Gyre lies the Sargasso Sea, a sea with no coastlines, defined only by the currents that surround it. Its name comes from the sargassum seaweed that floats in great golden brown masses on its surface, carried there by the gyre and held there by the calm. This seaweed forms a kind of floating forest, and within it, small creatures find shelter. Tiny fish and crabs and seahorses, using the seaweed as both home and camouflage, living their entire lives in this drifting world. The Sargasso is one of the only seas in the world where European and American eels come to breed. They travel from freshwater rivers and lakes across the ocean, following currents and instincts too ancient to name, to find this quiet central sea where they spawn in the deep water, and then the tiny larval eels drift back on the currents to the rivers where their parents were born. The eel's journey is one of the most mysterious in the animal world. They leave the freshwater rivers in the dark of autumn, when the nights grow long, and somehow find their way across thousands of miles of open ocean to the Sargasso Sea. How they navigate is still not fully understood. They may sense the Earth's magnetic field. They may follow the temperature gradients of the currents. They may carry some memory encoded in their genes, a memory of a journey that has been made for so many millions of years that it has become simply instinct. The deep river of the body, flowing as surely as the rivers of the sea. You carry deep rivers too. The blood in your veins is saltier than fresh water, almost exactly as salty as ancient seawater from hundreds of millions of years ago, when the first creatures with circulating blood evolved in a shallower, warmer sea. The ocean is not only around you, it is inside you. The tide goes in and out in your own body with every heartbeat. Every breath is a small ocean. Feel that now, if you like. The salt and the warmth of it. The rhythm that is older than thought. The deep current that carries you, quietly, through every sleeping and waking, through every night and every morning, without effort, without interruption, without end. Let us rest here for a moment, in this deep and quiet place. There is nothing that needs to be done. The rivers are flowing. They have always been flowing. The marine snow is drifting down slowly through the dark water. The sea cucumbers are moving so slowly across their ancient floor. The blue whale is somewhere in the deep, singing its long, resonant song that travels for 1,000 miles and arrives still whole, still singing at the ears of another whale who has been waiting quietly for just that sound. The thermocline holds the surface world in place, and below it, the deep world continues its own rhythm, its own set of clocks, its own kind of day and night, its own seasons measured in centuries rather than months. In the deep, 100 years is an ordinary unit of time. In the deep, you could wait without impatience for 1,000 years, and the water would still be moving, still be patient, still be carrying its cold cargo along the ancient paths. The seamount below us catches the current and sends a little upward swirl of nutrient water toward the distant surface. A colony of cold water corals, pale and branching like winter trees made of stone, filters the passing water. They have been growing one tiny calcium deposit at a time for perhaps 300 years. They do not hurry. They are made of patience, literally. Each millimeter of growth is a year of quiet accumulation, a year of water flowing past, a year of tiny food particles drifting within reach of their slow and graceful arms. There is a snailfish somewhere in the deepest part of the trench, drifting in the dark. It is not afraid. It has no concept of afraid. It is just drifting, and the water is pressing on it from all sides with perfect evenness, the way a favorite blanket presses on you from above, and it is simply alive, simply here, simply moving through its world with the unhurried ease of a creature that is exactly where it belongs. Be like the snailfish just for tonight, just for this hour. Let the pressure of the world above, all its noise and brightness and speed, stay far above you. Let yourself sink to the quiet level, the level where the rivers flow, the level where everything is cold and dark and perfectly still and perfectly right. Your breathing is slower now. Your body knows what to do. It has always known what to do. It breathes in, and the oxygen moves into your blood, and your blood carries it to every far and quiet corner of you, the way that deep currents carry oxygen to every far and quiet corner of the sea. Your body is its own ocean. Your rest is its own deep river, flowing steadily through the night, carrying you safely, without effort, through the dark. The last light of day, wherever you are, is settling now. The world above the water is growing quiet. Birds have found their branches. Flowers have folded their petals, each one a small, careful closing, a gentle putting away of the day. The wind, which was perhaps moving the tops of trees a little while ago, has softened into something barely perceptible, just a breath across the surface of things, like the first exhale of sleep. And deep below the ocean, the rivers continue. They do not stop for night. They do not rest between seasons. They have been flowing since the oceans first formed, in the early ages of the world, when the rain fell for millions of years and the great basins filled slowly, and the first currents began to stir in the new water, driven by temperature and salt and the turning of the young earth. Those first currents are the grandparents of the rivers we have been following tonight. The Black Sea River, the Mediterranean outflow, the Antarctic bottom water, the cold rivers of the Arctic. They are all descendants of that first stirring, that first breath of a planet learning to circulate its new oceans. And you, resting here, are part of that same world, made of the same water, shaped by the same ancient forces. The oxygen in your lungs right now was produced, at least in part, by the phytoplankton of the ocean's surface, those tiny floating plants that together produce half of all the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. You breathe what the ocean makes. You drink what the rain returns. You are held every moment in a web of water so large and so old that even the most patient, deep river is only one small thread of it. Feel the web gently around you, not constraining, just present, just there. The way deep water is just there, holding everything that lives within it. Tonight, you have traveled from the sun-warmed surface all the way to the floor of the sea. You have followed rivers that no human eye has ever seen, through canyons deeper than mountains, are tall, past creatures that live in the dark and the cold and the pressure, and are somehow incomprehensibly content. You have drifted with the marine snow. You have listened to the echo of a blue whale's song traveling through the deep sound channel. You have rested at the edge of a blue hole and watched the halocline shimmer in a beam of light. And now it is time to let even that go. Let the images drift away like snow through dark water. Let the rivers carry them gently off. There is nothing to hold on to. There is nothing that needs to be held. Everything is moving as it should. Everything is flowing where it needs to go. Even you. Even now. Close your eyes if they are not already closed. The deep water is around you. Not cold, not dark. Just still. Just present. The kind of stillness that holds you without effort. The kind of quiet that has no edges. Somewhere, a river is flowing along the ocean floor. It has been flowing for 1,000 years. It will flow for 1,000 more. It is in no hurry. It has no destination. It is anxious to reach. It simply flows because that is what water does, because that is what rivers do, because the shape of the earth and the weight of the water and the slow turning of the planet make it so, quietly and without fail. You can trust that. You can trust the water. You can trust the dark. You can trust the deep. Breathe in slowly. Let your chest rise. Hold it just for a moment. A small pause like the place where a river widens and the current slows. And breathe out. All the way, everything, let it all go with the breath. The seamount has disappeared behind us now, fading back into the dark as the current carries us gently forward. There is no rush. The river does not rush. It simply moves, the way breath moves. Not because anything pushes it, but because that is its nature. Because moving is what it has always done. Because the shape of the world invites it forward, and it accepts that invitation, quietly, without question. There is a place in the North Atlantic called the Denmark Strait, a narrow passage between Greenland and Iceland, where cold Arctic water spills southward into the deeper Atlantic basin. And when this cold water reaches the lip of the underwater shelf and tips over the edge, it falls. It falls in the most extraordinary underwater waterfall on Earth, a cascade of cold, dense water plunging nearly 3.5 kilometers, which is more than 2 miles, straight down into the depths of the Atlantic. The Denmark Strait Cataract, as it is called, carries roughly 5 million cubic meters of water every single second. That is more than 2,000 times the flow of the Amazon River. And yet, you would never know it was happening. It occurs in complete silence, far beneath the surface, in the dark, without drama, without noise, without anyone watching. The largest waterfall on Earth falls in absolute secret, in the absolute dark, at the absolute bottom of the sea. Imagine standing at the edge of it, not falling, just standing, feeling the current pull gently at your ankles as the water slides past you and then drops away into the dark below. You cannot see the bottom. You cannot see the water falling. It is moving too slowly for a waterfall in the way you might picture one. It is more like a very steep, very massive river sliding down a slope so enormous that the slope itself is invisible. The water does not crash, it flows. Downward, yes, but still flowing, still that same patient movement, just redirected toward a deeper silence than before. This cold water, once it reaches the bottom of the Atlantic, joins the convoy of deep currents moving southward. It becomes part of the global river, the great slow circuit. It will not see the surface again for hundreds of years. Right now, somewhere in the deep North Atlantic, there is water that sank through the Denmark Strait during the time of the Renaissance. Water that was last touched by sunlight when Leonardo da Vinci was painting, when Shakespeare was not yet born, when the forests of Europe were older and darker and full of creatures we no longer see. That water is still traveling. It has 1,000 years of journey still ahead of it before it rises again, blinking, into a sunlight it has never known. The deep rivers keep time differently than we do. They do not measure hours or days. They measure decades and centuries, the way mountains measured time in the slow uplift of continents, the way glaciers measure time in the inching of ice across stone. When you step back from the human scale of things and let your sense of time expand, slowly, the way the morning light slowly fills a room, there is something very restful in it. You are so small in the best possible way. Your worries are so recent. Your breath is ancient, but your worries are very new. The deep rivers have been here since before there were worries. They will be here after. Let that thought settle in you like sediment, like marine snow drifting slowly, peacefully downward. There are creatures in the deep that are bioluminescent. They make their own light. In the lightless world of the deep ocean, where no sunlight penetrates, life has invented its own illumination. Small fish with rows of tiny light organs along their sides, glowing in patterns like strings of dim stars. Jellyfish that pulse with a pale blue-green light when disturbed. Squid that can flash patterns of light across their bodies, communicating in a language made entirely of glow. The deep ocean is not completely dark then. It is full of small, moving lights, cold lights, gentle lights, lights that appear and fade like thoughts half remembered on the edge of sleep. One of the most beautiful of these bioluminescent displays happens when a ship disturbs the water at night and the bow wake lights up with blue-green fire. Millions of tiny dinoflagellates, single-celled organisms flashing in response to the movement. The wave glows. The wake glows. The foam glows. For a few seconds, the ocean shows you one of its most private and beautiful tricks, right there on the surface, available to any sailor willing to stand at the bow and look down in the dark. The deep rivers that flow below are full of these tiny lights too, each one a single cell living its entire life in the dark, carrying its small, cold fire through the deep. There is an ocean current called the Agulhas Current that flows along the eastern coast of Africa, moving warm Indian Ocean water southward at considerable speed. It is one of the strongest ocean currents in the world, and where it meets the cold water coming up from the Southern Ocean at the tip of Africa, something dramatic happens at the surface. But below, in the deep, things remain quiet. The currents interact, they mix, they influence each other, but the deep rivers beneath them continue their slow, cold, independent paths, unaffected by the drama of the surface meeting. The deep rivers are patient with the surface world the way old trees are patient with the wind. They feel it, they are connected to it, but they are not moved from their course by it. The Agulhas also has a habit of shedding eddies, circular loops of warm water that break off from the main current and spiral away into the Atlantic like slow, warm islands. These eddies can be hundreds of kilometers across, and they persist for months, slowly losing their warmth as they drift. Creatures inside the eddy live in a different world from the water surrounding it. Warmer, saltier, subtly different in chemistry. A small pocket of the Indian Ocean slowly becoming Atlantic. Over time, the eddy weakens, its boundaries blur, and it is absorbed into the surrounding water. Its identity dissolves. Its warmth becomes part of everything around it. It is no longer an eddy. It is simply the ocean. The way a worry can be like that. Sharp and circular at first, but if you let it drift, let it move through you without holding it, its edges begin to soften. Its temperature evens out, and eventually it becomes just part of the general warmth of the water. Not a separate spinning thing anymore. Just part of you, absorbed, integrated, as gentle as everything else. Breathe slowly. Let the water warm. The floor of the Pacific Ocean is the oldest ocean floor in the world. The Atlantic is younger. It began opening about 200 million years ago when the supercontinent Pangaea began to split apart, and it is still widening today by a few centimeters every year, about as fast as your fingernails grow. The Pacific, meanwhile, is being subducted. Its edges are diving beneath the continents that surround it, sinking back into the Earth's mantle. In a few 100 million years, the Pacific may be much smaller. The Atlantic may be much wider. The deep rivers that currently flow through both will find new paths, new valleys, new shapes. The ocean is not permanent. The ocean is also moving, also changing, also patient in its transformations, also trusting the slow process. We tend to think of the ocean as fixed. It is there when we go to it. It has always been there. It will always be there. But in geological time, oceans open and close like flowers. 250 million years ago, there was no Atlantic Ocean at all. The continents that now line its shores were pressed together into a single mass, and the water that now fills the Atlantic was part of a different, older ocean on the other side. The deep rivers of that vanished ocean no longer flow anywhere. They became rock. They became mountain. Their sediment is now dry land, perhaps the very ground that something is standing on tonight, or the field that a farmer walks, or the hill that a child climbs to look at the view. The ocean turns to land, and the land turns back to ocean, and the rivers of the deep flow through all of it in all its forms, through all its ages. There is a type of sediment found in certain parts of the deep ocean called pteropod ooze. Pteropods are tiny sea snails that live near the ocean surface, swimming with small wing-like appendages. Their name comes from the Greek word for wing. They are delicate creatures, translucent as glass, no bigger than a grain of rice. When they die, their tiny shells sink down through the water column and accumulate on the ocean floor, forming a soft, pale, chalky sediment. If you were to hold a handful of pteropod ooze, you would be holding thousands of tiny shells, each one a complete and perfect house, abandoned by its maker, drifting down through hundreds of meters of dark water to finally rest on the floor. There is something ineffably peaceful about that image. All those tiny shells, each one a whole life, resting in the cold and the dark and the quiet. Not lost, just resting, just waiting in the sediment for the next million years to pass the way. A seed waits in winter soil for the warmth to return. The deep ocean floor is made of resting things, resting shells, resting bones, resting particles of every creature that ever lived near the surface and then completed its small, complete life and sank. The floor is a resting place in the most literal sense, and the rivers of the deep flow gently over it, around it, through the valleys between the drifts of shell and sediment, and nothing is disturbed, nothing is swept away. Everything is left in its gentle rest. Your body knows how to rest. Your nervous system knows how to release. This is one of the things it has always known. Let it know it now. Let it do its quiet, ancient work. We are so glad you have stayed with us this far into the deep. If you are still awake enough to notice, we would love a comment from you, just a word or two, something you imagined, something that felt peaceful. And if you are already drifting, that is exactly right. That is exactly what this is for. In the Banda Sea, which lies between the islands of Indonesia, the seafloor drops into a deep basin surrounded by shallower ridges on all sides. Water can enter this basin over the ridges, but it accumulates inside, isolated from the broader circulation of the Pacific. The deep water trapped in the Banda Sea is old. It has been sitting there, cut off from the global conveyor belt, for a very long time, accumulating its own chemistry, developing its own quiet equilibrium. It is a pool within a river, a still place within a moving world. And in that stillness, a different kind of life has arranged itself. Creatures that depend not on the renewal of cold, oxygenated deep water from far away, but on the local chemistry, the local darkness, the local quiet. The Banda Sea Basin is one of those places that oceanographers visit with a kind of reverence, because the water there carries records that the more well-circulated parts of the ocean have washed away. Its sediment preserves a clearer record of past climates, past sea levels, past weather. It is an archive. It is a library made of still water and slow sediment, holding information that could not survive in a more restless place. Sometimes it is the still places that remember the most. Beneath the Gulf of Mexico, there are features called brine pools, pockets of extremely salty, extremely dense water that pool in depressions on the ocean floor. These brine pools are so dense that submersible vehicles can actually float on them, the way a swimmer floats more easily in salt water than in a lake. The brine pools have a surface, an actual visible surface like a lake within the ocean, a lake at the bottom of the sea, a body of still, impossibly salty water sitting quietly in the dark, surrounded by the more ordinary ocean water above and around it. The boundary between the brine pool and the surrounding water shimmers because light bends differently when it moves from one density to another. And even in the deep, the shimmer is visible to a diver's light. Around the edges of these brine pools, the same communities of extraordinary creatures that gather around cold seeps and hydrothermal vents have established themselves. Tube worms frame the edges of the pool like a garden border. Mussels cluster in thick beds where the brine meets the surrounding water. Small shrimp pick their way carefully along the margin, not entering the brine, which is lethal to most ocean life, but thriving in the zone just at its edge, where the chemistry is unusual and the food is concentrated. The brine pool provides structure, it provides a boundary. And wherever there is a boundary in the ocean, life tends to gather, because boundaries are where things mix, where gradients form, where opportunity arises from the difference between one thing and another. The margin of the brine pool, the edge of the halocline, the boundary of the deep current, the thermocline between the warm surface and the cold deep, the meeting of two rivers of different densities. All these edges, all these gentle boundaries, all these places where one world ends and another begins, they are alive with possibility, with adaptation, with the extraordinary inventiveness of life finding a way. You are at your own edge tonight. The boundary between waking and sleeping, the margin between the day that is ending and the rest that is beginning. This is a good edge to be at. This is a generous boundary. Let it be soft. Let it shimmer a little, the way the halocline shimmers when the light finds it. There are rivers inside the earth too, not just beneath the ocean. Groundwater flows through aquifers, moving slowly through porous rock, sometimes taking decades or centuries to travel a few kilometers. Some of this groundwater eventually reaches the ocean. It seeps through the sea floor in what are called submarine groundwater discharges, invisible inputs of fresh water that enter the ocean quietly and continuously along almost every coastline in the world. Scientists have estimated that the total volume of submarine groundwater discharge globally may rival the discharge of all the world's rivers combined. We knew nothing of this for most of human history. The rivers were flowing in secret all along, beneath our feet, beneath the sea floor, entering the ocean without announcement, without ceremony, quietly completing journeys that began as rainfall on a hillside and ended as a gentle seep through cold sediment somewhere beneath the waves. The Pacific Ocean is so large that if you removed all the continents from the earth and tried to arrange them inside the Pacific, you could fit them all. Every continent, every island, every mountain range, and still have room left over. The Pacific contains more water than all the land on earth combined has surface area. And through this vast basin, the deep rivers flow, the Antarctic bottom water creeping northward along the floor, the Pacific deep water circulating in its own ancient patterns, the intermediate water layers moving east and west and around the countless seamounts and ridges and plains that make up the ocean floor topography. The Pacific is old. Its oldest seafloor, in the western portion, is about 200 million years old, though even that old seafloor is young by geological standards. The rocks beneath the Pacific sediment have been recycled many times over the billions of years since the Earth formed. But the water is very old indeed. Some of the hydrogen atoms in Pacific water have been part of the Earth since the planet itself condensed from the solar nebula 4.5 billion years ago. Water from asteroids and comets that collided with the young Earth billions of years before the first single-celled organism existed. That water became the ocean. The ocean became the rain became the river became the sea, and the sea became the deep current flowing along the floor of the Pacific tonight, carrying within it molecules that are older than life on Earth. You are made of this old water. Your blood carries it. Your cells are full of it. When you breathe out on a cold morning and see your breath, you are seeing water that has been rain and river and ocean since before the continents took their current shapes. You are briefly returning it to the air, from which it will fall again as rain, flow again as river, sink again into the deep. The cycle has no beginning that we can identify. It has no end that we can foresee. It simply is, and you are inside it. And tonight it is carrying you gently, as it always has, as it always will. Let yourself be carried. You do not have to swim. You do not have to steer. The current knows where it is going. In the deep waters of the Antarctic, where the ocean is coldest and the winter ice spreads for thousands of kilometers in every direction, there is a sound that only the most sensitive instruments can detect. It is the sound of the ocean itself, the deep background noise of the sea produced by the weight of waves on the surface pressing down and releasing over and over, a rhythm so slow and so vast that it is below the threshold of human hearing. Infrasound, the heartbeat of the ocean, a frequency so low that it takes several seconds for a single cycle to complete, a rhythm measured in the turning of the earth rather than the tapping of a finger. Whales can hear this. Some of them may use it to navigate, the way you might navigate by the sound of a river when you are walking in the dark through a forest, following the sound of the deep current, feeling your way through the ocean with their bodies. The ocean speaks in frequencies we cannot hear, and the creatures of the deep have been listening for hundreds of millions of years, receiving information that we have only just learned to instrument our way into detecting. But some part of you can feel it, perhaps. Not hear it exactly, but feel it. The way you can feel the bass note of music in your chest, even when it is too low to clearly hear. The rhythm of the ocean is in you somewhere, below consciousness, below thought. In the oldest and quietest part of your body, it moves in you the way the tide moves, slowly, with great authority, without asking. Let it move. Let the deep tide do its work. You are safe here. You are warm here. Everything about tonight is designed for exactly this, for the gradual release of the day, for the soft dissolution of all that was held and carried, for the return to the simplest and most restful version of yourself. If there is one thing these rivers have taught us tonight, it is that the deepest things are also the quietest. The deepest rivers make the least noise. The deepest water is the most still. The deepest rest is the most silent. Depth and silence are old companions. They have always moved together. There is a phenomenon in the ocean called internal waves, waves that exist not on the surface, but deep inside the ocean, at the boundaries between water layers of different densities. These internal waves can be enormous, sometimes hundreds of meters tall, and yet they are completely invisible from above. The surface of the ocean betrays no sign of them. The waves move through the deep, slowly and silently, rising and falling along the invisible boundary between the warm surface water and the cold, deep water, traveling for hundreds of kilometers before they finally break against an underwater ridge or a continental slope. Internal waves are one of the primary ways that the deep ocean mixes. As they break against underwater features, they stir the water and cause the different layers to mix, bringing nutrients from the deep toward the surface and oxygen from the surface toward the deep. They are the unseen mixing spoon of the ocean, doing their work invisibly inside the water, far from any human eye. The ocean is full of processes like this, full of invisible work, invisible waves, invisible rivers, invisible exchanges that sustain the entire system without ever being observed or acknowledged by anything above the surface. The work that keeps the world going is mostly invisible. The roots of trees working in the dark of the soil, the mycorrhizal networks passing nutrients between trees underground, the bacteria decomposing and returning matter to the cycle, the quiet breathing of sleeping creatures through the night, the invisible rivers of the deep flowing their patient paths along the ocean floor. All of this is happening all of the time, without interruption, without the need for observation, without the need to be seen or known or appreciated. The world maintains itself through invisible diligence, through quiet, unwitnessed work. You can trust that. You can rest in that. You do not have to maintain yourself through this night. Something much older and much quieter than your thinking mind will do that for you. Your body knows how to breathe. Your heart knows how to beat. The rivers know how to flow. This is perhaps the last thing we need to say to you tonight, and we will say it softly as the marine snow falling through a mile of dark water. Everything is flowing as it should. Everything is moving where it needs to go. You are a part of the flow. You are in exactly the right current. And tonight, you can let the river carry you all the way down to the quietest, warmest, most still place at the bottom of sleep, down where the deep rivers whisper, down where the marine snow rests, down where the sea lily spreads its arms and asks nothing of the world except that the water keep flowing. The water is flowing. It has always been flowing. You can close your eyes now. The river is taking you home. The cold seeps on the ocean floor are breathing tonight. The tube worms are swaying in a current too slow to feel. The brine pool sits in its depression in the Gulf of Mexico floor, shimmering at its edges, holding its salty stillness. The Denmark Strait cataract is falling silently in the dark. 2 miles of invisible waterfall, more powerful than anything on the surface, known to almost no one, flowing without pause. Somewhere in the Pacific, a seamount is steering a deep current upward, and the nutrients rising from that upwelling are beginning to reach the surface. And tomorrow, when the sun comes back, the phytoplankton will drink those nutrients and multiply, and the ocean will grow a little more green and alive in that spot because of a river that passed a mountain in the dark, because of a current that has been making that same gentle upswelling for 10,000 years, because the deep rivers give to the surface world even when the surface world does not know to say thank you. You can be like that seamount in your own life, not doing dramatic things, not making noise, just being present in the path of something moving and allowing that presence to gently redirect something good upward, toward the light, toward the living, toward whoever might be waiting far above for the warmth that only the deep can provide. But that is tomorrow, tomorrow's current. Tonight, there is only the river. Bend the dark and the soft falling of marine snow through a mile of quiet water, and you resting here in the most private and peaceful place, the place between one breath and the next, the place between the surface and the deep, the place the halocline guards with its shimmer, the place where the world grows soft and the current slows, and everything that was held is gently, gently released. If our playlist is still playing, let it play. If this is the last story of your night, let it be the last. There is no correct way to end an evening. There is only the ending that finds you, and tonight the ending is quiet and blue and deep, and it smells of salt and cold stone and something very old, and it sounds like nothing at all, which is the sound that deep rivers make when they are flowing exactly as they should. Let me continue the story seamlessly from where we left off, writing 5 full parts. The night has deepened now. Whatever light was left at the edges of your evening has gone soft and distant, like the last pale glow of the sun seen from very far below the surface. Just a faint, diffuse brightness, more memory than light, more feeling than sight. And in this softening, the deep rivers continue. They always continue. They are the most reliable thing in the world, these invisible rivers, these patient flows that ask nothing of the night and give nothing to the morning except the slow, faithful work of circulation, of exchange, of keeping the deep connected to the deep. There is a ridge running down the center of the Atlantic Ocean called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and it is one of the most extraordinary features on the surface of this planet. It stretches from near the Arctic in the north all the way to the far south, a mountain chain longer than any range on land, mostly submerged, mostly unknown, winding its way along the floor of the Atlantic for thousands and thousands of kilometers. This ridge is where new ocean floor is being created. Magma rises from the Earth's interior through the ridge, pushes the seafloor apart, and solidifies into new rock. The Atlantic Ocean grows a little wider every year because of this. The ridge breathes in geological time, and its breath pushes the continents apart on either side, slowly, patiently, in a process that has been ongoing for 200 million years. The deep rivers of the Atlantic flow around and over this ridge. Where the ridge creates shallows, the currents are forced upward and over, like a river flowing over a submerged dam. Where the ridge has been cut through by transform faults, lateral cracks in the ocean floor where the rock has slid sideways, the currents can pass through, finding gaps in the mountain chain, the way a river finds a pass through hills. These gaps, called fracture zones, are some of the most important pathways in the deep ocean. They are the doors between the eastern and western basins of the Atlantic, allowing the deep water to pass from one side of the ridge to the other, continuing its slow journey through the dark. One of the most significant of these fracture zones is called the Romanche Gap, a deep cut through the mid-Atlantic ridge near the equator. Cold Antarctic bottom water flowing northward along the western floor of the Atlantic passes through the Romanche Gap and enters the eastern basin, where it would otherwise be cut off by the ridge. The gap is narrow, and the current squeezes through it with a slight increase in speed. You would feel it, if you were there, as a gentle but unmistakable acceleration, a subtle gathering of the current before it spreads out again into the wider eastern basin on the other side and resumes its unhurried pace. A river finding its way through a mountain. A river that has been making this same passage for millions of years, since the fracture zone first opened, since the ridge first rose, and the gap first formed. There is something quietly heroic about a river that finds its way through mountains, not in a loud or effortful way. The deep current does not struggle. It does not decide. It simply encounters the ridge and follows the shape of things. And the shape of things provides a gap, and through the gap it goes. And on the other side it continues as though the mountain were simply part of the path, which of course it is. Everything is part of the path. Even the obstacles are part of the path. The current knows this in a way that requires no knowledge at all. It knows it the way water always knows it, by following the lowest available way, by accepting the shape of the world and moving through it with perfect, effortless compliance. Take a slow breath and feel that. The path is already there. The gap is already in the mountain. You do not have to force anything tonight. Far beneath the surface of the Indian Ocean, a system of deep currents moves with the quiet authority of something very old and very certain of itself. The Indian Ocean is the warmest of the world's oceans at the surface, warmed by the sun that shines intensely on the land surrounding it. The deserts of Arabia, the plains of India, the dry heart of Africa. But in the deep, the Indian Ocean holds the same cold and the same dark as every other ocean. The warmth of the surface does not penetrate here. The sun does not reach this far. Down here, the Indian Ocean is indistinguishable from the Pacific, from the Atlantic, from the Southern Ocean. All deep water is cold. All deep water is dark. All deep water moves in the same patient and ancient ways. The Indian Ocean, deep water, as the major deep current of this basin is called, moves slowly northward along the western side of the basin, then curves eastward, following the topography of the ocean floor. It is guided by features we barely know the names of. Abyssal plains and fracture zones and underwater ridges that do not appear on any map most people have ever seen. The Carlsberg Ridge, the Central Indian Ridge, the Southwest Indian Ridge. These ridges organize the deep flow the way the banks of a river organize its surface flow, channeling the current, giving it direction, shaping its path through the dark. Along the way, the Indian Ocean deep water carries with it the dissolved oxygen that allows life on the ocean floor to exist. Some of this oxygen was last at the surface in the Southern Ocean, where cold Antarctic water descended with its cargo of dissolved air. That air is now traveling northward through the Indian Ocean, centimeter by centimeter, decade by decade, carrying the memory of a breath taken at the surface of the world, in air that might have blown across the ice of Antarctica before it dissolved into the sea. Everything carries something. Every current carries temperature, carries salt, carries oxygen, carries the chemical signatures of where it has been and what it has passed through. The deep rivers are not just flows of water. They are flows of information, of chemistry, of history. They are the memory of the ocean in motion. And the ocean remembers everything, not the way a mind remembers with images and words, but the way a body remembers with chemistry and temperature, with the subtle adjustment of every molecule to the conditions it has moved through. Your body remembers things too. It carries its own histories in its chemistry, in its rhythms, in the way it breathes and rests and repairs itself in the dark. Tonight, let it do its remembering. Let it have the dark and the quiet it needs to do its own quiet work. You do not have to think about it. The body, like the river, knows its way. If you have been drifting in and out of sleep during the story, that is exactly what it is for. Come back whenever the current brings you back, and drift away again whenever it takes you. There is no wrong way to travel in the deep. There are places in the deep ocean where the floor is almost entirely flat, vast level plains of fine sediment stretching for hundreds of kilometers without significant relief. These are called the abyssal plains, and they are among the flattest places on Earth. Flatter than any prairie, flatter than any desert, flatter than any salt flat baked by the sun. The abyssal plains are flat because the marine snow has been falling on them for so long in such consistent and gentle quantities that every roughness in the original rock has been buried and smoothed, every corner rounded, every valley filled. The ocean floor is a smoothed place, a gentled place, a place made soft by millions of years of slow, patient accumulation. Walking on an abyssal plain, if you could, would feel like walking on the softest ground imaginable. The sediment is fine and deep, and it would give beneath your feet the way very fresh snow gives, or the way the softest possible sand gives, with a gentle yielding, a slight sinking, a sense of the ground accommodating you rather than resisting you. There is no wind here. There is no noise. The temperature is constant. The pressure is immense, but perfectly even, pressing from all sides at once, so that no single surface bears more than any other. Everything is equal here. Everything is balanced. The abyssal plain is the most equilibrated environment on Earth, the most stable, the most consistent, the most perfectly still. The deep rivers flow over these plains slowly. The currents here are not strong. The plains were smoothed precisely because the water movement is gentle enough that sediment can settle and stay. A slight, persistent drift of cold water moves across the plain, stirring nothing, disturbing nothing, just flowing across the soft floor, the way a breath of air moves across the surface of still water, barely perceptible, barely there, but real. Imagine lying on an abyssal plain, the sediment beneath you as soft as anything you have ever felt. The water around you perfectly still except for that faint, cold, barely there current moving across you like a breath. The dark is complete, and the quiet is complete, and the temperature is constant, and everything is even and balanced and settled and smooth. That is where you are tonight, in your own abyssal plain. The day has deposited its sediment, and everything rough has been gentled, and the floor beneath you is soft and level, and the water above you is still. This is the deepest rest. This is the quietest place. This is where the rivers end their long journeys, not with drama, but with the quiet spreading of cold water across a smooth plain, the gradual release of all momentum, the final settling into stillness. The Southern Ocean, which circles Antarctica, and connects all the world's oceans in a single continuous ring of water, is the engine of the deep circulation. It is the place where the global river is most actively renewed, where old, deep water rises back toward the surface and new, deep water sinks to take its place. The Southern Ocean is where the conveyor belt turns over, where water that has been traveling in the deep for hundreds of years finally makes its way back toward the light, and where surface water, cold and dense and ready, takes the plunge downward to begin its own long journey. The upwelling in the Southern Ocean is driven by wind, the westerly winds that blow continuously around Antarctica, the roaring 40s, the furious 50s, the screaming 60s, as sailors once named them, drive surface water northward, and as the surface water moves away, deep water rises from below to replace it. This upwelling deep water is rich in nutrients, and the Southern Ocean is, as a result, one of the most biologically productive regions of the world's oceans. Phytoplankton bloom in enormous quantities in the southern summer. Krill feed on the phytoplankton in swarms so dense they can be seen from satellites. Penguins and seals and whales follow the krill. The whole southern food web is powered by the deep river coming back to the surface, delivering its cargo of nutrients accumulated over centuries of travel through the dark. The deep river gives. After all its centuries of silent travel, after all its patient movement through the cold and the dark, it rises and it gives. It brings up what the surface world needs, the minerals and nutrients that the sunlit surface has used and would eventually exhaust, replenished by the dark and the deep and the long, slow journey of the water through the mineral-rich layers of the ocean floor. The deep river is a supply chain, an ancient, patient, completely reliable supply chain, running in the dark beneath everything, delivering what is needed before anyone thinks to ask for it. This is a beautiful kind of generosity, the kind that works without announcement, without expectation of thanks, without even awareness of its own giving. The cold water does not know it is feeding the phytoplankton. The phytoplankton do not know they are feeding the krill. The krill do not know they are feeding the whale. And yet the whole chain holds, because the deep river has been flowing, because the upwelling has been rising, because the surface blooms, because life persists. You are part of chains like this too, chains of giving and receiving that you may not always see or understand, that operate in the background of your days the way the conveyor belt operates in the background of the ocean. You are given to constantly by things you cannot name, and you give constantly to things that may never know your name. This is not something to think too hard about tonight. It is just something to feel softly, the way you feel warmth without always noticing its source. The water in the very deepest trenches of the ocean, the Mariana Trench, the Tonga Trench, the Philippine Trench, is not simply the deepest water. It is among the oldest water accessible to oceanographers. The trenches are like cups sunk below even the abyssal plains, collecting water that sinks into them and then stays, isolated from the broader circulation by the walls of the trench on all sides. The water renewal in the deepest trenches happens very slowly. The deep water there may be hundreds of years old before it is finally replaced by fresher, more oxygenated water spilling over the trench walls. And yet, even in these most isolated and most extreme environments, Life has found a way. The snailfish we met earlier, amphipods, small crustaceans that swarm in the deepest trench water in surprising numbers, scavenging whatever organic material sinks to them from above. Single-celled organisms called foraminifera, which build beautiful and intricate shells of calcium carbonate in geometric patterns so precise they look designed, though they are grown cell by cell by a creature with no brain, no eyes, no intention beyond the ancient biological drive to grow. These organisms have been building their perfect shells in the deep ocean for hundreds of millions of years. Their fossilized shells, preserved in sediment cores, are some of the most important archives of past ocean conditions that scientists have access to. Each one a tiny library, each one a record of a moment in the deep. The deep trenches are the last pages of the ocean's book, the most remote, the most quiet, the most patient. They receive what falls from above and they hold it, and the creatures there have made their lives from the receiving and the holding. Nothing is wasted in the trenches. Everything that sinks is used. Everything that arrives is welcomed, taken in, made part of the community of the deep. There is a comfort in that completeness. In a world where nothing is wasted, where everything that comes has somewhere to go, where even the deepest and darkest place is full of small and purposeful lives, the ocean wastes nothing. The deep river carries everything it picks up and delivers it where it is needed. The trench receives and holds and transforms. The cycle is complete at every scale, from the largest conveyor belt to the smallest foraminifera building its shell one calcium atom at a time. You can rest in that completeness tonight. There is nothing left undone that cannot wait. There is nothing falling that has no place to land. Everything is cycling. Everything is held. Everything is part of the loop, including you, including this breath, including this moment of softness at the edge of sleep. The marine snow is falling. The snailfish is drifting. The foraminifera is building its perfect shell in the dark, atom by atom, without urgency, without awareness of the remarkable thing it is making. The deep rivers are flowing through the Romanche Gap, across the abyssal plains, along the walls of the trench, under the ice of Antarctica, up through the Southern Ocean into the golden summer blooms. The conveyor belt is turning, as it has turned for millions of years, as it will turn for millions more. And you are here in your own deep place, in your own particular stillness, held by the quiet that the night provides. The day is very far above you now. Its noise is on the surface, and the surface is far away. Here in the deep, there is only the river, only the current, only the soft and steady movement of very old water through very patient dark. Let the river carry you now, all the way down to the softest, most complete rest, down past the thermocline, down past the last pale memory of light, down to the floor where the sediment is soft and the marine snow has been falling for 1,000,000 years, and everything that arrives is welcome, and everything is quiet, and everything is whole. You are whole tonight. You are deep. You are still. Sleep now. The rivers will keep flowing while you do. They always have. They always will. And when you wake, the water will still be moving. The ocean will still be breathing. The world will still be quietly, faithfully, invisibly maintaining itself. The way it always has, the way it always will, the way you always knew it would, somewhere deep in the oldest and quietest part of you. Good night. Sleep well, dear traveler. The deep is with you. Thank you for this long and quiet journey with us tonight. If the Sleepy Nature channel has been a comfort to you, a like or a kind comment below means so much. And our playlist is always there, full of other soft and patient worlds, waiting for the next night when the surface is too loud and you need the deep. We will be here. We are always here. Good night.